Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Creighton. Welcome to Friday, October 4th, 2024. When we come back, the opposition is in charge of the House of Commons. Flash, breaking news. We'll explain exactly what I mean by that momentarily. So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Yes, please like the station, as Sasha the Cat always demonstrated. Like it now, early in the broadcast, because we need to beat YouTube suppression, and believe me, they'll probably try to suppress this one, but we're not going to let them, are we? Because we're going to rise above, because we are the people. Little line from John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. And if we ever lived in another era of the Grapes of Wrath, we're living there right now, because if you're not part of the elite, we are being crushed by those who are a member of the elite. So what's happening in the House of Commons? And why is the mainstream media oblivious to this? Are they just ignoring it? Do a search. Go ahead. I've done it for the last 24 hours. There's maybe one story I noticed this morning from Global News is actually saying that there's a crisis in the House of Commons. What's happened is that the Speaker has ruled, and I mentioned this yesterday, but it wasn't quite clear yesterday what's going on. The Speaker has ruled that the House of Commons was correct in demanding the unredacted documents pertaining to the Green Slush Fund. This is sustainable development. You know, this crazy corporation that is essentially giving away free contracts, unvetted contracts to liberal friends. Anybody who's got a great idea about green energy, and of course, doesn't have to be necessarily a great idea. It can just be a liberal idea, and bang, you've got a contract. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. And the Speaker, don't ask me why. Well, maybe there's a method to this madness, and we'll explore that later. But Greg Fergus, who we've all grown to love to hate over the last year, because he kicked out Pierre Poilievre, if you recall, because he dared to call Justin Trudeau a wacko. That was unparliamentary language, and he wouldn't retract it, and he was thrown out of question period. And we all said, yeah, Greg Fergus is in the pocket of Justin Trudeau. He was Justin Trudeau's parliamentary secretary. So you can bet these two talk a lot, even though he's now the Speaker and supposed to be independent of the Prime Minister. The Speaker ruled, though, these unredacted documents should be sent to the RCMP, which would make them essentially tabled in the House. Now, this was greeted with complete hostility by the Liberal House Leader, Karina Gould. And you recall Karina Gould was the Member of Parliament and House Leader at the time who happily invited a former member of the Waffen-SS, a Nazi paramilitary group, a Nazi military group, excuse me, let's be precise about this, to come to the House of Commons, to come to Parliament and sit in the gallery for 2 standing ovations. And it was Karina Gould who said, after she was embarrassed, not only because she was too stupid to realize that anyone fighting the Russians in the Second World War was on the side of the Nazis, she said, let's just excise this from history. Let's pretend it never happened. Let's just delete it, redact it from the paper, from the official Hansard. Let's pretend it never happened. How Orwellian is that? So she's back again, making black white, turning what is upright upside down, pretending that somehow the villains in all of this are not the Liberals with their schemes, with their graft, with giving away hundreds of millions of your tax dollars to their friends. No. The Liberals aren't to blame. The Conservatives are to blame because they're power hungry. So the Speaker has actually ruled that the House has to discuss Liberal corruption. That's what it comes down to. He didn't say that, okay? I'm not going to pretend. Speaker says House must discuss Liberal corruption. He said the House must discuss everything surrounding this green slush fund. Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDTC. They have to discuss this organization that is feeding off of your tax dollars. Now, once again, why is the mainstream media not notice it? This has meant that the government's agenda, the Trudeau government's agenda, has ground to a literal halt. Stopped. And look at the order of business here. The House agenda. Private members' business. It's like the government has disappeared from the agenda. That's the only way I can describe it that makes sense. The government has disappeared from the agenda. This is what this is telling us. Now, was it noticed by anybody? Yes. Here's an article. Canadian press said government brought to a standstill following Speaker's ruling. It's about the only story you can find out there. And of course, the fact that it's on Canadian press should mean it should be on just about every media outlet, because having worked for mainstream media, everybody sees the Canadian press. Everybody subscribes to the Canadian press. Everybody uses the Canadian press stories every day. That's called the wire service, which is still valid today, even in this internet age and the age of social media. We still have wire services. And so they're picked up by all the mainstream media, television, radio, print. They all get this. So here's the evidence, if you will, that the House has come to a standstill over this. Now, I've got some incredible clips to show you here that are mind-boggling in terms of how Trudeau and the government are reacting to this situation. But what does it really mean? Before we get into this, what does it really mean? It means that the official opposition is in control of the agenda right now. On Friday, October 4th, the official opposition is in control of the agenda. And where are the opposition parties going to go? Now, the Bloc is threatening now to bring down the government, even though the opposition parties agreed to pass their old age pension legislation. So that was essentially a vote of non-confidence in the government, even though officially it wasn't. But it was a de facto vote of non-confidence when you have all of the opposition parties ganging up on the government and saying, no, we're not going to pass, we are going to pass this bill, even if you don't want it passed. So the Bloc is definitely on side with the Conservatives now for a early election. As I've said many times, the Bloc has no business being in the House of Commons. It's a separatist party. It doesn't fight for Canada. And we'll get into that later. Karina Gould thinks they fight for Canada. The separatists don't fight for Canada. They fight for only one province in this country, and they have no business sitting in a federal House of Commons. I say that again and again and again. Maybe someday people will realize how true it is. I'm sure most of you viewers agree with that. But that's where we are. The NDP, of course, is looking at the polls and saying, in some of them, they have surpassed the Liberals for second place. Now, it's a distant second place, with the Conservatives 20 percentage points ahead, headed for a supermajority, the largest majority in Canadian history, outstripping that of John Diefenbaker in 1958 and Brian Mulroney in 1984. So they're headed for a huge victory. But the NDP is looking at this and saying, hey, we might be the official opposition again. You can bet power-hungry Jagmeet Singh, who knows the knives are out to get him because of his atrociously poor performance as the leader of the NDP, is looking at these polls and saying, this might save my skin and my pension, by the way. So he could kill two birds with one stone. Keep his pension, which is coming up in March. He gets his full pension as of March 2025, and keep his leadership role of the NDP, because there's a lot of people in the NDP want him out because he's been a disaster as leader. He vacillates. He pretends he's an opposition leader when he's in cahoots with the Liberal government. He is ineffective. He has a boycott of one against Loblaws. He has stupid news conferences where he doesn't know what he's talking about. One day he's against Justin Trudeau. The next day he's for Justin Trudeau. This might be his means of salvation. So what's going to happen? Okay, I'm predicting this. If we don't have a November election, as I've said for the last, 6 weeks now, Trudeau will prorogue the House out of desperation. And we can see a lot of people talking about this behind the scenes. And I'm hearing this, a lot of other people are hearing. Prorogue is definitely on the table. Now, certainly that was not on the table 2 weeks ago. That was a, shall we say, a fantasy that was not going to happen. It could happen now out of desperation for Justin Trudeau, who thinks it might save his leadership of the Liberal Party and save his government from being voted out of existence. That is good news for all of us who love freedom, because that means the bills that are so odious, Bill C-293, the vegan bill, it's going to essentially outlaw meat eating, that will go. Charlie Angus's bill that outlaws promotion of the oil industry or fossil fuels, that will go. This residential schools bill that will make denial of the Liberal narrative, that will go. And most importantly, Bill C-63, the online harms bill, will be gone. So we won't have to repeal it, and I don't trust any future government to repeal it. So we need to kill it before that happens. Let's watch some clips, and it gives you a sense of how crazy the atmosphere in Ottawa is right now.
To October of next year, because my son, my eldest, who was in utero while I was running for the nomination, Sophie was pregnant with him when I was running for the nomination in Papineau, will be old enough to vote for the very first time in the next election. So that for me is a beautiful bookend, and it's something I want to not voting that. Although he did ask me why he didn't get the Canada carbon rebate, that I said, no, I get that check at home.
Excuse me? All right, first of all, Justin's assured a victory because his son will be voting in the next election. But secondly, did you catch that? Justin Trudeau is getting the Canada carbon rebate. How is that possible with the salary he gets? It's supposed to be for the hard hit in Canada. It's supposed to be for those low-income people. Justin Trudeau's getting the Canada carbon rebate. Is this a slip of the tongue? Is this a fantasy? What's going on here?
Wait, because some of my friends got it. I goes, yeah, well, your friends live on their own. That's a different thing. So it's in your. That's a good line. I'll give you the allowance.
More to come, folks. This is incredible.
Look, the House is seized with multiple issues of Liberal corruption that actually don't even include the issue that we've raised today, this latest issue. But the most recent one to seize the House, that's one caused by the Liberals allowing for hundreds of millions of dollars in dozens of conflicts of interest to flow inappropriately to Liberal insiders under.
Now just pause. This is Michael Barrett, Ontario Conservative MP. He has led the charge against Liberal corruption along with other MPs. I'll mention Michael Cooper as well, the Edmonton MP, who's done a lot of work on this. Hasn't been getting a lot of ink in the last couple of days, but I take my hat off to Michael. He's done some great work on this, and he's been on the show numerous times talking about it. I think we'll try to get him on if we can ever have some breathing space with what's going on. But this is very, very interesting with what Barrett is saying here, because this green slush fund is so immersed in corruption, so incredibly inundated with corruption, that it's amazing the Liberals had the gall to think nobody would notice. And that's really, I guess, if I could make one point about this green slush fund, this Sustainable Development Technology Canada, it's the fact that the Liberals thought nobody would notice how grievously and egregiously corrupt this is. Let's listen to some more Stephen Barrett.
A Liberal appointed chair who was found guilty of breaking Canada's Conflict of Interest Act. A majority of members of the House of Commons did vote ordering the government to turn over its documents to the RCMP so that they can review them and take appropriate decisions. But the government is in violation of that order as ruled by the Speaker of the House, and that matter can be dispensed with very quickly. The government simply has to follow the order of a majority of members that were democratically elected to the House of Commons, which they're not doing right now. The other issue that is yet to be dealt with in the House is that of the other Randy saga.
Who's Randy? Randy, as I said in my opening statement, was an autocorrect.
That how many times do you say it? 9 references to Randy? Every one of those 9 is an autocorrect? Where we have the minister from Edmonton Centre, Justin Trudeau's Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre, Randy Boissonnault, his business partner who he was continuing to do business with, or there's evidence that, contrary to what Mr. Boissonnault claims, that he was continuing to direct his business that he had a 50% stake in while he was serving in Justin Trudeau's cabinet. His business partner, the Speaker ruled, did not provide the evidence and information that was requested by a parliamentary committee. And it's very simple. Well, the key question was, who is the other Randy? Because the allegation that's been made by some is that it's Justin Trudeau's minister from Edmonton. These are issues dealing with Liberal corruption that have seized the House, and they're effectively obstructing their own agenda, their own productivity. They can't get out of their own way, and this matter is one that hopefully.
Okay, you're all aware, of course, Randy Boissonnault, the employment minister, who appeared to had 2 jobs at the same time, as a minister, excuse me, and a lobbyist. Now, this is just so incredibly unbelievable. And all the evidence is pointing to the fact that, yeah, this is the Randy who was still on the firm's payroll. He was doing work. We've never been allowed to get to the bottom of this because Boissonnault is being protected. And of course, every time he opens his big mouth, when Cue Ball opens his big mouth, it's always to whine about how persecuted he is, how nobody likes him, how he's always the target of hateful people. Poor Randy. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact you're up to your neck in this deep state swamp. Maybe it's got something to do with that, Randy. But thank God for Barrett and others who are pursuing Randy Boissonnault, because this is just another example of just how corrupt the Liberal government is.
We can get some sunshine on so as to disinfect it and restore Canadians' confidence.
Yes. Now, Andrew Scheer. I want to say something about Andrew Scheer. He was the former leader of the opposition, the former leader of the Conservative Party, lost to Justin Trudeau. And unfortunately, I think, he could have been a better leader than he was, but he was one hell of a good speaker. And nobody understands the parliamentary process better than Andrew Scheer. He was a very good speaker. He applied himself to that job. And by the way, I've known Andrew Scheer for, once again, going on 15, 20 years. And he's a hard worker. He's a good family man. And he's a principled individual. And I think I trust his personal honesty and integrity. And of course he's partisan. Of course he's biased. But I think he's really understands what's going on here. That Greg Fergus is doing what he has to do, which is acknowledge and accept the will of the House of Commons, which voted to see these documents, as Stephen Barrett just outlined, and to send them to the RCMP. Now, the RCMP might say, we don't want to see them because we don't want to charge anybody here, but Canadians need to see them. And that's what Andrew Scheer's point is.
Mr. Scheer, seconded by Monsieur Berthold, moves that the government's failure to fully providing documents as ordered by the House on June 10, 2024 be hereby referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Monsieur Scheer, appuyé par
Mr. Scheer, seconded by Mr. Berthold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for upholding one of the most important principles of parliamentary democracy, and that is that those who are tasked with the awesome responsibility of making laws, passing taxation measures, and spending money have all the information that they could possibly need to properly do their jobs. Here in this House, we vote on all different kinds of legislation. We vote on laws that touch on broadcasting, on agriculture, on food labeling laws. And to do that, we need to make sure. So when the government collects those tax dollars out of the pockets of the hardworking Canadians who earned it, the people who get up before the sun rises and come home after it's set, when we reach into their pockets after they've earned their pay through the toil and sweat and often blood that they expend to do their job, we better have a darn good reason to take that money out of their pockets. And when we take all that, when the government takes all that money and collects it here in Ottawa and decides who to give it to, it better darn well be for the reasons it was explained to take the money in the first place.
I think that's an excellent encapsulation about what is wrong with the Liberal government, with the Trudeau government. It takes your tax dollars and expects you to just smile as it gives your tax dollars away to its friends, with no accountability expected from this government. And Andrew Scheer says it better have a darn good reason for spending your tax dollars. Well, that will apply to a Pierre Poilievre conservative government as well, but it sure as hell isn't applying right now to the Trudeau government, because it doesn't have a darn good reason for spending your tax dollars except to build its own power base and to feed its friends.
And what we uncovered with the SDTC Green Slush Fund scandal was abhorrent. It violated the fundamental basic premise of responsible government, the idea that the dollar that is taxed should go to the program that it was allocated for the reasons that it was. What we found out is that the government set up this fund and appointed the board of directors, basically out of the ranks of Liberal supporters. The Liberal-friendly board of directors started to make decisions as to the allocation of that money to fund their own companies, to fund projects, Mr. Speaker, that the Auditor General found didn't even have a single environmental benefit. So,
all right, so Michael Barrett is next up, but I think that's an excellent explanation about what the Green Slush Fund actually is, why it violated, I think, the law. That needs to be assessed properly, but it violated all semblance of ethics and morality and any sense of accountability. And the Conservatives are trying to flag this as any way possible, and they've done it right now, and the mainstream media isn't reporting it. Let's hear some more from Michael Barrett, Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, Member of Parliament.
Finds the matter to be a prima facie case, a question of privilege. Accordingly, I would now invite the member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes to move his motion. The honourable member.
That the House, having considered the unanimous views of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics expressed in its 12th report, finds Stephen Anderson to be in contempt for his failure to provide the information which the committee had ordered him to produce, and accordingly order him to attend at the bar of this House at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on the next Wednesday the House sits, which is at least 1 week following the adoption of this order, for the purposes of...
Now, this is the other Randy. This is Randy Boissonneau, our blessed employment minister, who wants to talk about everything else except this issue.
Mr. Barrett, seconded by Mr. Macaulay, Edmonton West, move that the House, having considered the unanimous views of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics expressed in its 12th report, finds the motion is in order. Debate. The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Set that up for you so you didn't have
Well,
to hear the whole.
here we go again. And we're here in this place dealing with another example of Liberals who don't seem to understand that their job is to represent Canadians and not represent the best interests of their best friends and their business partners. Of course, I'm talking about the saga of the other Randy. So we don't know who the other Randy is, and that's one of the main reasons that we find ourselves here today. One of the questions that the witness, Mr. Anderson, refused to provide to committee when he had an obligation to do so. Now, why do we need to know who the other Randy is? Well, at the heart of this is the minister from Edmonton, the Liberal minister from Edmonton, who was found out to own 50% of a business while he was serving in a cabinet, and it was believed that he was directing the operations of that company. Now, the minister said, of course, it's another Randy. We heard from members of the Liberal caucus that perhaps it was Randeep, and we heard from the witness, Mr. Anderson, that he could only tell us if we held an in-camera, a private meeting of the Ethics Committee so that he would reveal it to us. Now, the committee rejected that. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If they've got nothing to hide, they should show us who the other Randy is. But it gets worse, because in the multiple appearances at committee that we've had of witnesses on this strange story of the Liberal minister from Edmonton and his business dealings, we learned, of course, that this NDP Liberal government did award a contract to that Liberal minister's business while he was serving in cabinet. That's outrageous. And of course, it's not allowed under the conflict of interest regime that we have in this country. Said another way, it's illegal. And we heard from the minister, he said when he first appeared at committee that he hadn't been in touch with his business partner, Mr. Anderson, in 2022. He said it. He was explicit that he hadn't. But the thing is about this company and about everyone who seems to be involved in it is that it's pretty sketchy. And that sketchy company is involved in a massive lawsuit that alleges fraud of $500,000. There's an unexplained but suspicious warehouse fire that targeted only the inventory at this Liberal minister's company's warehouse. And so through the legal system, we're learning through the disclosures that there has in fact been contact in direct contradiction to what that Liberal minister said.
And once again, I think that was an excellent summation of why there are such issues surrounding Randy Boissonneau and whether or not he was actively promoting a business while he was a cabinet minister. That should outrage every Canadian. That should outrage anybody with a sense of honor. And if that's what our politics have come down to, God help us. Little more here.
Why, Mr. Blanchet, why are you still willing to work with the Liberal government when they voted down this motion? Is that not sending a signal of some sort?
Okay, let's understand things as they are. The government, I will learn that word one day, did not have the spine to provide us and Canadians and Quebecers with a clear answer. So they just want to get some more time and to keep not deciding about anything. They might hope that they will go further than October 29th. They will not. So they have until a few days from now to go on with the royal recommendation. And if they do not, we will start as rapidly as next week to speak with other oppositions in order to get ready to go into an election. And I will tell you both in English and French that it is noticeable that the NDP voted in favor of this motion and that they could have eventually to assume the consequences of such a vote if we get to the next step without the government providing us and Canadians and Quebecers with what we want.
So, as I said at the beginning of the show, the Bloc is now committed to overthrowing this thing. No, that's the wrong word. Don't say that. The Bloc is committed to supporting a non-confidence vote against this government. That's what Blanchet, who I have no time for, but that's what Blanchet just said. And he also alluded to what I said at the beginning of the show, that the NDP is looking increasingly likely that they will support a non-confidence vote. So what is Trudeau thinking right now? How do I disentangle myself from this mess? Because he's looking at the imminent downfall of his corrupt government. The issues are springing up everywhere. The evidence of how corrupt his government is are obvious. Even if the mainstream media is not reporting on the fact that the House of Commons has ground to a halt, it's inescapable that this is a corrupt government. Justin Trudeau is looking for any way out, and that could be to prorogue Parliament so he doesn't have to face an election in November. So he can somehow stay as leader of the Liberal Party and as Prime Minister of Canada. That might be the strategy here. And who knows, maybe Greg Fergus is thinking the same thing, that this is a means and an opportunity to save Justin Trudeau's skin. I wouldn't put it past anybody in politics today. Now, we're going to finish the segment with some wonderful moments with Karina Gould, the House Leader, who absolutely disgusts me because she is just a completely pathetic excuse for a member of Parliament and for a House Leader of any party. She's the one who smiled when she met with the former Waffen-SS member, Jaroslav Hunka, before he received his standing ovations in the House of Commons. And she's the one who wanted to do the George Orwellian thing and redact all evidence of that happening. So I have no time for Karina Gould, but just listen to her try to project her own failings and that of the Liberal government on other people.
Right now is something that every single Canadian should be extremely alarmed about. The Conservative Party of Canada has put forward a motion that would blur the lines of the independence of our democratic institutions, notably that between the legislative branches of government and the judicial branches of government. Every branch of government, with the exception of the legislature, is bound by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And now the House of Commons and parliamentarians have extraordinary powers and extraordinary privileges that they get to exercise, should be in the support of democracy. But what we are seeing
I just have to stop for a second. Have you ever heard such bullshit? This has something to do with the Charter of Rights. This has something to do with the jurisdictions separating the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. What the hell is she talking about? This is about exposing Liberal corruption. It's that simple, Karina Gould. It's got nothing to do with the Charter of Rights and Canadians being denied their charter rights so we can discuss Liberal corruption. Oh, that's a violation of the Charter to discuss Liberal corruption, is it, Karina? This woman is so vacuous or just such an adept propagandist that it's really nauseating to listen to her. But we'll listen to the end of her little dissertation here.
Conservatives do right now is attempt to use those extraordinary powers and extraordinary privileges to get around judicial oversight and to basically trample the charter rights of Canadians. They have the power, and it is confirmed, and Parliament has extraordinary powers, to be able to compel documents. That is something that is agreed upon. But what they are doing for the first time unprecedented in Canadian history, is compelling documents not for the use of parliamentarians, but to give directly to our federal police, to the RCMP. Now, there's a reason why the RCMP normally and have, the responsibility to get a search warrant or to get a subpoena or to go to a judge to get information from Canadians, because they are bound to protect the charter rights of Canadians. And if they're going to suspend those rights, they have to have the authority to do that. But what the
once again, this has nothing to do with suspending anybody's rights. Whose rights? The Liberal government? You have a right to continue to spew out corruption? To be unaccountable? This has got nothing to do with the police exercising some sort of unauthorized search. These documents are being provided. Can you understand that much? No.
Conservatives are trying to do is to say that they are going to use the extraordinary privilege and power of Parliament to go around those very necessary and correct judicial oversight mechanisms, to go around the charter-protected rights of Canadians. And now they are saying, oh, well, we're not telling the police what to do here, but we're giving them the documents. Well, that is completely inappropriate, and it is a complete abuse of power.
Because it exposes Liberal corruption, and you don't want that. And this somehow is violating every other Canadian's right. How can anybody stand up with a straight face and deliver a monologue like this? Because it really is a comedic monologue. She belongs in stand-up comedy.
And it is something that should not happen in a democracy. And Canadians need to be alarmed that if they are going to do this in this instance, what else are they going to do? They have shown time and time again that when it...
What other corruption would they might expose about this government? Oh, just think. It could get worse than this for you, Karina.
Comes to the rights of Canadians, it's not a top priority for them. And for me, as a citizen in this country, I don't want to live in a country where politicians can direct the police on what to do, where they can go and suspend the charter rights of Canadians because they have the right to do so. The real question here is, just because you have the right to do something, should you actually do it? And
do you want to live in a Canada that invites former members of the OPNSS, Nazis, to come to the House of Commons for standing ovations? Is that the Canada you want to live in, Karina Gould? Apparently so. Nobody's rights are being violated in this process. This is a constitutional right of the House of Commons. This is how the House of Commons is supposed to operate. You can't see that. Of course you can, but you're pretending you can't. This is all, you're reading your talking points provided by Justin Trudeau's handlers. This is all about denying somebody their charter rights by exposing corruption. Of course it doesn't make any sense. It's not supposed to make any sense. These people don't make any sense. They just spew nonsense and hope it's going to work with some of their base. Let's conclude with this one.
MP Karina Gould says that Bloc Québécois is working for Canadians. I can't wait for Liberal supporters to explain to me this one.
I can tell you that Liberal members of Parliament, NDP members of Parliament, Bloc members of Parliament are here to work for Canadians.
I support the interests of Quebecers, and I also support the idea of independence for Quebec.
What are you looking for in terms of gains for Quebec?
Please let me keep something for tomorrow.
How do you feel about getting all of this additional power?
Good. Thank you.
How many times have I've been on this broadcast saying the Bloc is a traitorous, treasonous party because they want to destroy Canada. They want separation. And they have no business sitting in a federal legislature doing that. We should amend the Elections Act so they can't sit in the House of Commons because they're a separatist party. And Karina Gould now says the Bloc is working for Canada. Not in a month of Sundays will the Bloc ever work for Canada. They are there to work for Quebec and Quebec independence, Quebec separatism, Quebec autonomy, whatever you want to call it. That's what they're there for. They're not there to work for Canadians or Canada. They never have been, they never will be. And Karina Gould, of course, the same Karina Gould who invited a Nazi to the House of Commons is the same Karina Gould who thinks separatists are just great. Separatists, she wants them to work with the Liberal government. And this is what this is all about. Karina Gould really deserves defeat in the next election. I hope she's one of the first Liberals to go, because I have nothing but contempt for this woman and the way she misuses her power, the way she distorts reality, and the way she continues to be nothing but a cheerleader for Liberal corruption. And that's all this is about. So you won't hear all of this in the mainstream media today. Maybe they'll wake up, but it's Friday and the weekend's coming. So I don't know, but you saw it here. It's chaos in Ottawa. The official opposition is effectively in control. The Liberal government is on the run, and so is Justin Trudeau. And we're going to watch, and we'll keep on this over the weekend to see what's happening. Because I know the time is short for this Liberal government, one way or the other. Justice will prevail. God's will prevail in this. And we are not going to see some of this legislation passed one way or the other. So keep watching throughout the weekend. I'll be here giving you all the news that you need to know so that you can continue to resolve to resist. Until tomorrow, or maybe even later today,